The South Australian Premier was Steele Hall, and the opposition leader was Don Dunstan.
Great memories, obviously, great memories there.
Yeah. So in March that year, Russell Morris released a song called The Real Thing. At the Oscars, Oliver won Best Picture and Barbara Streisand won Best Actress for Funny Girl.
Oh, yeah.
Hair opened in Sydney, where a young American singer called Marsha Hines debuted in Australia. The Beatles released Get Back, and the movie Midnight Cowboy came out. In July, Neil Armstrong took a giant leap for mankind. And in August, nearly 400,000 people showed up at a farm in Bethel, New York for the Woodstock Music Festival. It was definitely one hell of a time to be alive and in love. Now, none of those events are going to mean a hell of a lot to the youngsters that are here tonight, so...
Sorry, Zoe.
Let me try to paint a clearer picture of what it was like back then. There were no computers, iPads or Google. A net was something you hit balls into while playing tennis. And if you needed to research anything, you'd go to a huge set of books called an encyclopedia, a big book called a dictionary, or a large book of maps called an atlas. There were no DVD players, video recorders or YouTube. If you wanted to watch a movie, you had to go to the cinema or a drive-in. Alternatively, you could set up a projector and pull out reels of old family movies that may or may not have footage of your old man doing an Eskimo wig. There was no Facebook. In fact, Facebook's founder, Mark Zuckerberg, wouldn't even be born for another 15 years. The closest thing to Facebook was the White Pages telephone directory, which of course was another big book. There was no Foxtel, and television was in black and white. Humphrey B. Bear was on it though, so was Kerry Ann Kennelly. There were no mobile phones. If you wanted to use the phone, you had to go to it, generally located in the hall or kitchen of the house. There were no push buttons, you literally had to dial numbers into it. The telephone directory containing the phone numbers of your family and friends was, you guessed it, another book. Car doors had to be opened with a key, and passengers could only get in once the driver had gotten in and manually unlocked the doors. Once you were inside the car, there were no electric windows, parking sensors or digital displays. There was a push-button radio, and if the car had air conditioning, you would have been impressed. Yes. There was no Spotify and no CDs. Music was purchased either on vinyl or a thing called an 8-track. There was a brand new invention called the cassette, but not many people have bought them yet because they didn't have something that could play them. So it was a few years prior to 1969 that Diana Haynes met David Mottram at an Adelaide party when they were introduced by a mutual friend. Dad would have been about 25 and Mum 22. Shockingly, a case of crossed wires might have prevented this union from ever happening. Dad took a shine to the young Miss Haynes, but after taking one look at the other blokes that she was chatting to, decided he couldn't compete and spent the rest of the evening catching up with his mates. They met again a year or two later in Sydney after Dad had moved there for work with Johnson & Johnson, and Mum was over there on business. At the urging of a mutual friend, Mum called Dad, and he took her for a drive on a Sunday after, in Mum's words, grudgingly fitting her into his tight schedule.
So what's strange?
This may or may not have been when Dad first kissed Mum. Neither of them seem to be able to remember when that momentous event occurred. It must have been one hell of a smooch. Things started to get more serious after Mum moved to Sydney to be an air hostess with Qantas. Without the good-looking Adelaide blokes around, Dad's confidence was sky high. But Mum was in a new city with a new job and new friends and wasn't interested in getting serious with anyone. After going on a few dates together, Mum started to get the feeling that Dad was going to pop the question, but decided that even though he was a nice bloke, she was going to knock him back. Then, on December 24th, 1968, while they were waiting up to go to a Christmas Eve service at a local church, he suddenly came out with, "Will you marry me?" There was no bended knee, no ring, no fanfare, just a casual question smack bang in the middle of an otherwise normal conversation. It proved to be a masterstroke. It caught Mum completely off guard, and to her horror, she heard herself say yes. There was a moment of silence as they both sat there stunned, Dad because she'd actually said yes. Mum, meanwhile, was trying to work out how she could backpedal out of the position her stupid mouth had just got her into. The next day she left on a plane to the US. The decision, the next day she left for a plane to the US and spent the whole trip thinking, what the hell do I do now? The official date of their engagement was a couple of weeks later on the 11th of January 1969. That was when they travelled back to Adelaide to make the announcement to their families. It was only when Mum saw Dad interacting with the families that she realised that after 2 weeks of questioning the decision, that she might have made the right call. 3 months later, on a lovely April day, they were married at St Matthew's Church in Marriottville. Dad had started the day feeling a little under the weather because he'd made the rookie error of holding his bucks party the night before. He had a bit of a sore throat from saying good day to God through the big white telephone. A couple of times the night before. But looking at the wedding photos, you would never know.
They've gone red.
The reception was held on the tennis court of Mum and Dad's Beaumont home because in those days all houses had tennis courts. Unfortunately, the honeymoon was memorable for all the wrong reasons. Rather than fly Mum to a tropical paradise, Dad elected to pack her into the car and then drove her 2 hours to Maitland, where they stayed with one of Dad's mates' Fido. Dad has since atoned for this mistake by taking Mum on holidays to places like the Maldives, New Zealand, Italy, and a cruise up the west coast of the US. Now, being together for 50 years on its own is a hell of an achievement, but there's a lot you can do in 50 years. So I asked both of them to what they consider to be their greatest achievements as a couple. Predictably, they said successfully raising one exceptional son and 2 good ones. Who have all gone on to work in interesting careers. I think there's a lot more to talk about than that, though. Individually, they both achieved a hell of a lot in their chosen areas of interest. Mum is an exquisite painter who sells many of her works at art shows. She's also Adelaide's preeminent tour guide, having conducted historic walking tours around the city for, what is it, Mum, 30 years?
30 plus. Well done.
30 plus. You're actually talking now about stuff you were doing 30 years ago when you talk in your walks. What my mum doesn't know about this city isn't worth knowing. She's forgotten more about this city than most of us will ever remember. Now, Dad has earned an OAM for his service to the community, specifically the Arthritis Foundation, which he chaired for many years, and he continues to donate his time to Rotary, to run the super fund of his ex-employer, to his golf, to students, basically to anybody who asks him for it. I honestly don't know of another person who gives so much of their time to others as my dad.
Well done.
Yep. As a couple, they've raised 3 drop-dead gorgeous sons who have all grown up being successful in their chosen fields and who you would never mind having a beer with. 2 of those sons have also provided 4 beautiful grandkids, all of whom will benefit from the knowledge and gentle guidance of their grampy and grandma. They won't admit it, but Mum and Dad are also both very good golfers, and after over 30 years of playing the sport, they should be. Dad knocked me off not once but twice last week. What's more about this is that they actually enjoy playing together. And as an avid golfer, I can tell you that on occasion, that's probably the last place I'd want Annie to be with me. And finally, a list of their achievements as a couple wouldn't be complete without a mention of the beautiful house and gardens at Port Wollonga that they built from scratch, including the wonderful veggie patch, which continues to deliver so much lovely produce. So, when it comes to being happily married for half a century, what are the secrets? What are the things that the rest of us can take away to hopefully one day be celebrating our own golden wedding anniversary. When I asked Dad that question, his response was respect, trust, and shared values, which is all lovely. Now, I don't know what kind of a day Mum was having when I asked her. But her responses was patience, closely followed by tenacity and forbearance. Now, to me, that wasn't painting a great picture of her. So, to be sure I understood the context she was using these words in, I looked up their definitions. So, patience means the capacity to accept or tolerate problems or suffering without becoming annoyed or anxious. Tenacity means the quality of being very determined or continuing to exist. And forbearance means patiently restraining from the impulse to do something. So basically, according to Mum, marriage is about being determined to survive whilst putting up with your partner and all the while restraining yourself from doing something. To be fair though, the fourth thing on her list was actually liking each other, so there was something positive in there.
Oh, thank God for that.
Now, I've joked around a lot tonight, but as I bring this speech to a close, I wanted to give you all my perspective on this relationship, because having been born just 2 short years after their wedding, I've seen more of it up close than anyone else in this room. So, for nearly 48 years, I've witnessed the love and respect that these two have for one another. I've seen the friendship that means they're just as happy on their own as they are with others. And yes, Mum, I've witnessed your patience, tenacity and forbearance. Particularly when Dad comes home after a long lunch with the boys. To me, love is about understanding someone, appreciating all of their good qualities and accepting the things about them that you may not be so crash hot on. I was taught this implicitly by Mum and Dad because that's how they've always been with one another. And it's one of the best lessons I've ever learned. In fact, it's one of the best lessons all 3 sons have ever learned. I think the length of all of our relationships a testament to the fact that we grew up in a loving household and learned how to love from two of the best in the game at it. So, if you could raise your glasses, here's to 50 years of wedded bliss, of love, laughter and happiness together, and here's to many more to come.
It doesn't work anyway.
Well done, Ben.
Cheers.
Yeah, please.